Good morning, everybody. When we think of the great cities of Asia, a city that comes to mind is Hong Kong. But it didn't used to be that way. Early 1800s, it was just a barren rock. And on this date in 1839, August 23, events occurred there which led to the first Opium War. This map of the Silk Road reminds us that there were links between China and the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean that go back almost 2,000 years. The land route between Europe and China. And the fuss was all about silk. The Chinese had the technology, so to speak, of how to make silk from silkworms eating mulberry leaves and then spinning cocoons, and they had a monopoly on this for a long, long time. So Marco Polo went from Venice to China in the 1200s, and the tales that he wrote about China really captivated Europe. And once the Age of Discovery gets going, 1400s and following, people get more and more exposed to not only Asia, but Africa, South America. So the global economy is getting going, and for many Europeans, China simply meant porcelain that you see on your table or on your bookcase, glazed pottery. Well, during the age of the empires, you could see how the European powers are carving up parts of the world, particularly Africa. And the Chinese were really feeling the heat during the age of imperialism. So how do you control Europeans in your country? Well, if you look in the lower right corner in China here, you can see Hong Kong, and just north of it is Canton. And that was where the Chinese limited the presence of Europeans. That's their strategy. So here's an opium poppy, and the sap from the poppy, from the seed pod, is opium. And this is linked to heroin and morphine. Super addictive. And the British, who controlled India, were harvesting opium in India and then trying to get it into China, which the Chinese government did not like. And they resisted this. But there was a lot of money to be made, and the Brits really pushed it, and a lot of Chinese became addicted to opium. And here's a photograph of Chinese men with opium. So the Chinese government resisted, and one Chinese official, particularly Lin Zhiji, he became famous for destroying opium. And here you see a picture of the Chinese trying to destroy opium as they're finding it. And Li also wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, pictured here. Now, we're not sure if Victoria actually read it, but it did get published later, and in it he basically said, hey, Victoria, you're destroying my country. What's going on? Because for most English folk, China was where tea came from, or it's where you got your porcelain or Chinaware, so to speak, but people didn't think about opium. So here you see Hong Kong in the lower right, and northwest of it is Canton, although today it's called Guangzhou, and it's in this area that the British and the Chinese clashed on this date, August 23, 1839, and this led eventually to the Opium Wars. Two wars fought between Britain and China over opium. The Chinese didn't like it, the British wanted to push it, and eventually Britain won, and one result was that China got carved up by the great powers, and the United States too, with what they call treaty ports or spheres of influence, where they basically were free from Chinese law. And that ended eventually. So the legacy of the Opium Wars, well, one of them is that the British got Hong Kong. And here you see a double-decker bus from London in Hong Kong. Here's another photo from Hong Kong where the Happy Valley racetrack is. This is a horse racing track still in use, built by the Brits, probably the most expensive piece of turf in Asia. And Shanghai, the great trading port with its British buildings, reminder of the legacy of the Opium Wars in the 1830s.